Talking about injuries, let's kind of shift over to football because injuries is kind of part of the theme of today's episode. You have two guys that are actually coming back from injury. Kalen DeBoer officially announced that Tim Keenan and Jam Miller are going to be available for this Georgia game. What kind of, obviously this is a huge jolt to both the offense and the defense. Tim Keenan being one of the more vocal leaders on the defense. And then obviously having your lead back is always good when you're going against an insane Georgia defense. What are kind of your thoughts on getting those guys back? Obviously, I think they've been practicing and getting prepared to get to this level, but what kind of impact do you think it has on the first game back?
Yeah, I think it's interesting today that they told us for sure right away that they're going to be back because Alabama is not the most upfront with injuries, like I kind of talked about earlier uh, with Kalen. But we talked to Kane Womack first this morning, and I asked him, like what it would be like or what Tim could bring even if he plays in limited reps, and he was like, "Oh, he's playing." So I don't know if Kalen necessarily wanted them to get that out today, but it was let out with Kane, and then he was asked about Jam and said he'd play too. So I think with both those guys, they're obviously seniors. Tim Keenan's one of the captains. He's somebody that, they're both players that their teammates really respect. So I think their leadership is huge. I think their experience, that they're guys that have played in these SEC matchups in the trenches. I saw, apologies that I can't remember who it was. It may have been Nick Cully or it may have been a national person talking about the Jam Miller's two receiving touchdowns have come against Georgia, both in huge games. He had that. I think it was a wheel route in the SEC championship, and then it may have been last year too in the regular season. So he kind of historically plays well against Georgia. The rushing offense has really struggled the last couple of weeks. Like if you look at their running backs yards per carry, it's especially if you take out that long AKD or run against ULM, it's pretty bad. Like and Wisconsin kind of has a good defense. It's hard to know about Wisconsin after you saw what happened to them against Maryland. And I can't say I watched that game, but just kind of looking at the box score of it. And then ULM's, not great. And so the fact that like you couldn't really run the ball against a team like Louisiana Monroe is kind of concerning going into a matchup like Georgia, but you also haven't had Jam Miller. So, and I think it goes, to the running backs and the offensive line blocking. It's kind of a combination of both those things. But I think offensively, Grubb said today that having better success in the run game takes more pressure off of Ty. And I think what we saw in week 1 against Florida State when things kind of started to fall apart is he was putting too much on himself of, well, I've got to make this play down the field. Like I've got to make the throw. And then it led to some bad decisions. So I think having Jam back helps him with that. It also helps him pass protection, things like that. And then Tim Keenan on the defensive side, you're going against an SEC offensive line for the first time. And Kane Womack even said today that Keenan, he's a big guy. He's kind of known for plugging up the middle of that defense, but he's gotten better in his pass rush. And that's something that's been a huge emphasis for Alabama all offseason. They talked to us about it all throughout fall camp. And then the first 2 games were kind of a dud in that respect. And then against Wisconsin, I think they had the 4 sacks. So I think Keenan brings you some versatility inside. I don't know how many reps he's going to be able to play on Saturday. I mean, Kane sounded very surefire, like he's obviously going to play. We don't know how much, but I think just having him on that defensive front, especially with the Beeman injury, some of the other issues they've had on the defensive line, I think will be huge for this defense.
I think it also speaks to both of those positions, but like you said, because of the Beeman injury, both of those positions currently are being led by younger people, right? Both the running back room and the defensive line currently have underclassmen now. Kevin Riley has done a great job, but he's still more of an underclassman, right? He's been here a couple of years, but he's an underclassman. In my mind, it's also a standpoint of you're getting 2 guys back that have been on the road in the SEC, and they're going to be able to help, calm the nerves and quiet. And it's, I think that honestly, not having Tim Keenan there for the Florida State game, not that it changes the impact of the game, but I think that matters, right? When you're missing a vocal leader on the sideline, I think that absolutely matters. And so I think having both of those guys back is a massive, massive deal. I also think that when you're talking, if you're talking about the offensive side of this, I do think that the running game, I think it partially has to do with the running back. When you were talking about the offensive line, I'm actually curious. I'm curious as to your thoughts. I personally mentioned at the end of the Wisconsin game, and I think that you saw kind of an ongoing right tackle battle during that game because Wilkin Formby gets pulled and Michael Carroll comes in. And then, Ty had some better, it felt like we got more movement in the run game. It felt like there was a little bit better pass protection when Carroll was in. Do you think, and, the answer may just be you're not sure, but do you think that Michael Carroll gets the nod in Athens on Saturday, or do you think that we go back to Wilkin Formby and, Wilkin gets the nod until proven otherwise and we have to slide in Michael again? I know in Athens on the road is a tough one, but I think the freshman deserved it.
Yeah, I mean, I think Wilkins going to get the nod for the start, and then I think Michael Carroll's still going to play because Ryan Grubb was asked today, are they still going to rotate along the offensive line? And he said yes, which is interesting because we talked last week to players towards the end of the bye week. The media schedule and the practice schedule were different because it was a bye. And Caden Proctor said, like, we've got to find the best five guys. We've got to find the right combination. And the coaches have been telling us we're going to keep rotating guys. And so I asked him, do you think it's a good thing to keep rotating all season, or do you need to find, a set five for continuity? And he said at first you can keep rotating, but it's better, for us if there's the same five guys. But for this week, Grubb says they're still going to rotate. So I think that'll be at right tackle and then also the guard positions. And I think I was talking about this with my coworker today. It's odd to me because I've never played football. I'm not a huge like X's and O's expert, but I would think because last year Alabama kept rotating along the offensive line almost all season long, but it was a different offensive coordinator. Grubb is like an O-line guy. Like he's been an O-line coach in the past. I would think like he would want it to be a set five. And so like I don't know what the reasoning is. I don't know if it's today's age in college football and the portal and you want to keep as much depth as you can. You want to keep as many guys happy as you can. But you would think at the end of the day, you're going to play the five guys that are going to give you the best shot at winning. And so I think just because they've had Wilkins start the first three, because he has more experience, because it's a road SEC game, I think Wilkins will start at right tackle. But I won't be surprised at all if we see Michael Carroll. In fact, I'll probably be more surprised if it's Wilkins the whole time at right tackle.
It kind of to your point when you're talking about Ryan Grubb, I think that if I remember correctly, Kalen DeBoer was asked similarly at the beginning of the season about the rotation along the offensive line last season. And he was like, oh, no, I don't think that that's really going to be the case this season. And then through the first three games, that's been absolutely what we've seen, and part of that has to do with freshmen stepping up and other, Jaden Roberts getting back healthy. And like, there's multiple contributing factors to that. It's not as simple as, oh, we went from not rotating to rotating. But I do think that it's very interesting that it really feels like, to me, it feels like Wilkin was the option they expected to go with, but Michael Carroll has been so good throughout practice that it's like we just have to give him the reps. Like I understand that he's good and we didn't want to rotate, but like Carroll's been elite, like he deserves the reps.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the case. And it was interesting talking to Caden last week because like I think it's pretty well documented how good of friends he and Wilkin are, like just off the field and have been since their freshman year. And so he's asked questions about Michael Carroll. He's asked about the rotating, and it's like, he's being honest, but also it's like that's his best friend. So I think sometimes we forget about the personal relationships on the team too. And in a way, because we talked to Cam Dewberry, I think before the Wisconsin game, maybe it was before ULM, but he was talking about how he thinks the rotation is a good thing because it keeps guys fresh. You can come in late in the game and don't have as many reps on your legs. And like, I see that point of view of it. Like there are pros to it. But you would also think at some point you do want to settle in with the five guys you think are going to give you the best shot at winning the game. And who knows, Wilkins could come out and have the game of his life, blocking and pass protecting and run blocking and all that stuff. So we'll kind of see on Saturday.
Yeah, no, I just was curious as to your thoughts. Like I said, I think that battle has been one that I'm with you. I'm not usually a huge X's and O's guy. Like that's just one that has kind of jumped off the screen at me every game because, like I said, it's been one that's kind of gotten a lot of attention. So I was just curious as to your thoughts. I guess, and you don't have to fully, say like, hey, I think that Alabama, does this or that. But I know a lot of people have talked about Alabama's struggles on the road. And hey, how is this a difference? I'm, in my mind, I'm looking at this as I understand Alabama has struggled on the road, but Kalen DeBoer is also, the stat that everyone, talks about is 6-0 against Dan Lanning, Kirby Smart, and Steve Sarkisian. I look at it as some of the biggest games of his career. Like I was in Baton Rouge last season on the road. That was a huge game. Obviously, Alabama dominates. I think that Kalen DeBoer often coaches up to the big games sometimes down to the smaller ones, to his detriment. But I'm of the mindset that the team's going to be fully, prepared and absolutely ready to go in Athens. Am I crazy in saying this? I know, like I said, I know a lot of people are kind of pointing to, they think that, oh, this is a road environment. Um, this is going to be a really tough one, but I really give Alabama a little bit more of a chance in this one, not just a chance, but I think that they have a very good chance to win
Mhm.
because of his success in big games. I think that Kalen kind of always shows that he's up to that challenge.
Yeah, something's got to give this weekend. They haven't been great on the road, but Kalen's been really good in big games, and Alabama's been really good against Georgia. So it's like something's got to give. And like you said, that LSU game last year, it seemed like, oh, they've really turned a corner, gotten the bugaboo off their back about playing on the road. And really, my sisters made a good point this weekend. I have two sisters, and we all love football. That really, under Kalen, they've played really good, which there's a small sample size, but coming out of buys, because last year the Georgia game and the LSU game were both off buys. So yes, this game is on the road, but they've had an extra week to prepare. I think because of what happened week one, it was a huge wake up call. And they've talked about that. The players have talked about it. The coaches have talked about it. That they, the kind of the theme from the players and the coaches especially has been they've got to respond better to adversity on the road. That a lot of times they shy away or retreat, which is like kind of concerning for an Alabama football team. That like when adversity comes, they're retreating. But that's got to be the key on the road because they know it's going to happen. So how do you respond to that adversity? And so I don't think they're going to jump out 28-0 like they did last year. I'm sure it'll be a little closer than that. But then again, none of us expected that last year, and that's what happened. So, yeah, I think that the whole, like, there obviously is some truth to the playing on the road thing because the record wouldn't be as bad as it's been over the last quarter of a season and a season. But, like, you do have those examples of LSU and Wisconsin that like they can do it, and LSU has one of the obviously Alabama has historically had a lot of success in Baton Rouge, but um, that's one of the toughest environments in college football, and they killed LSU. So yeah, I think that they've the players, if there's been any sort of mental block on the road or after the Florida State loss, Kane talked about they've got to do a better job at protecting the sideline, and I'm not exactly sure what that means, or I think it's just kind of, he was talking about more the headspace they have to be in. But I would think after what happened week one and then having 2 whole weeks to get ready for this game, I don't think the playing on the road is going to be as big of a factor as some people are worried that it might be.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm also personally of the mindset that when you're talking about this game specifically, I think I would have been a little more concerned about this game had Georgia lost to
Mhm.
Tennessee.
Yeah,
Yeah,
same.
I really think that Georgia beating Tennessee was to Alabama's favor because I think that Kirby, after a loss, I would have put more faith in than DeBoer in a big game. Obviously, DeBoer hasn't lost in a big game, but again, Kirby after a loss, I think that the motivation and the level that he's able to get that team to, I think, is generally on another level. And so I do think that there is some extra, hope that Alabama has in that standpoint. Is um, you know some teams don't always learn from the close win because when there's a win on the scoreboard, you
Hmm.
don't always fix the mistake that happened that really caused it to be as close as it was, right? And so I do think that that is something that I'm personally thinking is going to make an impact, but I am very curious to see what happens in Athens. Obviously, it's going to be a huge weekend this weekend. I'm sure you will be there, um, but this is going to be a big one.
Yeah, I will be there, and I agree that I think if Georgia had lost, it would not have been good for Alabama. It was kind of a win-win for Alabama fans because Tennessee loses, and then you don't have a super pissed off Georgia team.
I would absolutely agree with that. Well,